Today is January 3rd, 2025 with the VIHE. We're reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 5, texts 15 to 24. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Śrīmad Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharani Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Deshatarani Panchakalpa Jibhascha Kripasundhi Bhavatapati Tanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavi Namo Namah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So again, this is Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 5, Text 15 to 24, January 3rd, 2025. So we're going to go through the verses. Please stay on mute, but we're going to go through the verses together. Shri Narada Uvacha Etavad Brahman Yoktva Vira Rama Mahamatihi Tam Sani Britsya Kupita Sudino Rajasevaka. The great sage Narada continued. I just want to kind of note that Narada Muni is telling this story of his disciple. Who will also be talking then about Narada Muni. The great sage Narada Muni continued. The great soul Prahlad Maharaj became silent after saying this to his teachers, Shanda and Amarka, the seminal sons of Sukra Acharya. These so-called Brahmanas became angry at him. Because they were servants of Hiranyakashipu, they were very sorry, and to chastise Prahlad Maharaj, they spoke as follows. So again, what Prahlad Maharaj said, just to review, right? He said that I'm automatically attracted to the Lord, because the teachers were asking him, where did you get this knowledge? Who taught you? And Prahlad says, hey, it's the mercy of God and it's automatic. So his teachers did not like that very much. Aniyatam are vetram asmakam ayashakara kulangarasya durbudes Chaturto Shodito Damaha. Oh, please bring a stick. This Prahlad is damaging our name and fame. Because of his bad intelligence, he has become like a cinder in the dynasty of the demons. Now he needs to be treated by the fourth of the four kinds of political diplomacy. So what are they interested in? Their own name and fame. They're interested that, well, I'm going to get a bad reputation. Imagine if we have a devotee Gurukula and, all the children end up becoming atheistic, blasphemous meat eaters. So the teachers might be worried about their own reputation. So here, these demon teachers, they're really worried, that our boss's son, he's become a devotee of Vishnu. People are not going to want to send their kids to our school anymore. They're not going to engage us in doing yajnas anymore because our reputation will be damaged. Daityaya chandana vane jatoyam kantaka juma yan mulan parasor Vishnu nala yito nitor baka. This rascal Prahlad has appeared like a thorn tree in a forest of sandalwood. To cut down sandalwood trees, an axe is needed, and the wood of the thorn tree is very suitable for the handle of such an axe. Lord Vishnu is the axe for cutting down the sandalwood forest of the family of demons, and this Prahlad is the handle for that axe. Iti tam vidido payar Vishayam star janadibhi praradadam grayayam asa tri vargasyo padamanam. Shanda and Amarka, the teachers of Prahlad Maharaj, chastised and threatened their disciple in various ways and began teaching him about the paths of religion, economic development, and sense gratification. You all notice moksha is absent there. This is the way they educated him. Tata enam gurur gnatva gnata gneya chatustayam daityendram darshayam asha matrir mishtam alankritam. After some time, the teachers Shanda and Amarka thought that Prahlad Maharaj was sufficiently educated in the diplomatic affairs of pacifying public leaders, appeasing them by giving them lucrative posts, dividing and ruling over them, and punishing them in cases of disobedience. Then one day, after Prahlad's mother had personally washed the boy and dressed him nicely with sufficient ornaments, they presented him before his father. So just to note here that Prahlad is again not being outward about his Krishna consciousness. If he's asked, like when the teachers asked him, he replies, but other than that, he's keeping his devotion hidden, because this way Shanda and Amarka think, okay, well, it worked. We were able to educate him. He's given up his mentality. Just keep that in mind, because this will be a contrast later on when Prahlad Maharaj is very overt in school. Padayo patitambalam pratinanjasish asura par ishvajya chiram dobhyam paramam apanirvritim. When Hiranyakashipu saw that his child had fallen at his feet and was offering obeisances, as an affectionate father, he immediately began showering blessings upon the child and embraced him with both arms. A father naturally feels happy to embrace his son, and Hiranyakashipu became very happy in this way. We're going to see this change in Hiranyakashipu's emotional state. Aropyankam avagraya murjanyashru kalambubi ashincham vikashad vaktram idam aha Yudhishthira. Narada Muni continued, my dear King Yudhishthira, Hiranyakashipu seated Prahlad Maharaj on his lap and began smelling his head. With affectionate tears gliding down from his eyes and moistening the child's smiling face, he spoke to his son as follows. So he's really feeling deep affection for Prahlad. Hiranyakashipur uvacha parad anyuchayam tata swaditam kinshid uttamam kalan aita vatasyushmam yad aikshyad gurur bhavan. Hiranyakashipu said, my dear Prahlada, my dear son, O long-lived one. How interesting is that? How long-lived one. And very soon, Hiranyakashipu is going to try to make him a short-lived one. But right now, he's blessing him, O long-lived one. For so much time you have heard many things from your teachers. Now please repeat to me whatever you think is the best of that knowledge. And you notice he's just saying teachers and guru. He's saying guru from your teachers. And so Prahlad Maharaj is kind of free to interpret that as he likes, what guru he's going to quote from. And now 23-24, which is a very important verse in the Bhagavatam. Shri Parada Uvacha Shravanam Kirtayam Vishnur Smaranam Padasevanam Archanam Vandanam Dasyam Sakyamatma Nivedanam Iti Punsarpita Vishnu Bhaktischennaiva Lakshana Kriyate Bhagavat Yada Tanmadye Ditam Uttamam. Prahlad Maharaj said, hearing and chanting about the transcendental holy name, form, qualities, paraphernalia, and pastimes of Lord Vishnu, remembering them, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, offering the Lord respectful worship with 16 types of paraphernalia, offering prayers to the Lord, becoming his servant, considering the Lord one's best friend, and surrendering everything unto him. In other words, serving him with the body, mind, and words. These 9 processes are accepted as pure devotional service. One who has dedicated his life to the service of Krishna through these 9 methods should be understood to be the most learned person, for he has acquired complete knowledge. So what's the best knowledge? This is the best knowledge, and as we'll find out in our next class, Hiranyakashipu doesn't appreciate this very much, and his mood radically shifts. All right. So here again, we're continuing with Prahlad's devotion and Hiranyakashipu's response. So our summary of this section is that Prahlad's teachers instruct him again and bring him again to his father, who feels much affection for him. So this kind of a repeat. Prahlad was sent to school. He was instructed. He was brought before his father. His father felt affection. Prahlad talked about going to the forest and worshiping Hari. Hiranyakashipu gets angry at the teachers, not at Prahlad, at the teachers, sends Prahlad back to school. The teachers get angry at Prahlad. They teach him again. When they think that he's sufficiently instructed, again, they bring him to his father. And again, he's teaching about the Lord, now in more details with the 9 processes of devotional service. So the basic question that's answered in this section is, what is the essence of being a devotee of the Lord? What does it mean to be a devotee of the Lord? We're going to be looking at, of course, the 9 processes, and also about how to live in this world as a devotee, kind of a continuation of the verses from yesterday. How do you live in the world? How do you have the proper consciousness of the Lord in the world? And this is, of course, very important, because anybody can say, well, I love God. This morning, a class I was hearing from Srila Prabhupada, he was quoting Savai Pum Samparo Dharmo Yato Bhaktira Hoksajaya Hoituki Apritiyata Yadatma Supersediti. And he was saying that the Bhagavatam is very liberal. It's not saying you have to have this or that religion, but it's saying that you have to have a religion that brings you to love God. But then how do you do that? What does that mean? How will that manifest in your life? So I often tell this story. It was years ago in the Boston Temple that this one woman came to the Sunday feast, and she said, I'm a disciple of Jesus. And I said, well, that's great. I said, what could if I looked at your life, if I saw how you're living your life, what would I see? What would you be doing? And she said, well, you wouldn't be able to see. It's all in my heart. But here Prahlad Maharaj is giving, again, what are the actual manifestations? Okay. And the main themes we're looking at in this section are, we're looking at the 9 processes of bhakti, any of which can bring success, and all of which should be done directly for the Lord without motive. Also, there's themes in the purport which are indirectly implied in the verses about the rules for each varna, especially Prabhupada talks about the brahmanas and the kshatriyas. And we keep coming back to this theme about that materialists and spiritualists have a very different perspective. Kind of the night and day verse from Bhagavad Gita. All right, so let's go through this section by section. So first we're looking at verses 15 through 18. So in the purport to text 15, Srila Prabhupada writes, a dog must satisfy his master, but a brahmana does not have to satisfy anyone. He is simply meant to satisfy Krishna, anukulenya Krishna anushilanam, quoting Madhya Lila 19:167. That is the real qualification of a brahmana. So we don't have time to go into this in great depth. This concept is something that we talk about in career dharma, how the Shudras have this mentality of service. They have a mentality of service. They want to satisfy their customer or their client. And actually, this mentality of service is the glory of the Sudra Varna. Elsewhere in the Bhagavatam, the Shudras are glorified for this, and that everyone can learn from this mentality of service. However, the other 3 Varnas do not have this mentality. This mentality of service of the Shudras is actually a great qualification for bhakti. So if someone has a temperament to do Shudra work, this temperament of service can easily be dovetailed in bhakti. That instead of just thinking I want to please the customer or the client, immediately I can think about how I want to please Krishna. But again, the other Varnas do not have this. And without this, it gives them some sense of independence. And Prabhupada's particularly having a contrast with the Brahmana, that the Brahmana is willing to speak straightforward truth that doesn't necessarily please the person to whom they're speaking. You're a fool. You're not worshiping the Lord. It's a different mentality. And the Kshatriyas, they also, although they want their citizens to be happy, their mood is more like a parent than a servant. So both the Shudras and the Kshatriyas are serving people, but the Kshatriyas are doing like a parent. And I give the example, if your child says, I want ice cream, you might say, well, first you have to eat your broccoli. But if your master says, I want ice cream, if you're a wait person in a restaurant and the customer says, I want ice cream, you don't say, well, my dear customer, you haven't finished your broccoli. It's a different mood. And that you can say, well, the Vaishyas are always talking about customer service. The business people are always talking about customer service. However, they're not exactly trying to please the customer. They're trying to create wealth for society. To do that, they need the customers to come and buy from them. But they're willing to have policies that make customers unhappy in the short run in order to keep their business profitable. Because if they don't keep their business profitable, they won't be able to have sustainable, regenerative service to their employees and to their customers. So it appears that the Vaishyas are putting projects before people. So the Vaishyas and the Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas, they don't have this mentality that's there in the Shudras. And we sometimes condemn the Shudras for this, but every quality has its two sides. This is actually the glory of those with this temperament to work in this Varna. Going into text 16, in the purport, Prabhupada says, principles are used to suppress him. Legal orders, pacification, the offer of a post, or finally weapons. So to suppress people who are a problem in the government. So if you have a political enemy, so there's law, there's pacification, the offer of a post or weapons. And we see politicians regularly do these kind of things. Okay, in 17, we have this metaphor given by Shanda and Amarka that the Lord is the axe itself, the devotee is the axe handle, and the Lord uses the devotees to cut down demoniac civilizations. And Prabhupada reveals his own strategy in the purport, where he says, quote, the thorn tree of demoniac civilization can be cut to pieces by the axe of Vishnu Bhakti, devotional service to the Lord. Some of the members of the demoniac civilization, like Prahlad Maharaj, may become the handle for the axe to assist Lord Vishnu, and thus the entire forest of demoniac civilization can be cut to pieces. So this is our job as devotees of the Lord, is to become the handle of the axe of Vishnu and to cut down the demoniac civilization. 18 is very interesting, where there we see Shanda and Amarka are teaching Dharma, Artha, Kama, but not moksha. And Prabhupada comments that people generally use religion as a mean to obtain sense enjoyment. Prabhupada says in the purport, quote, no one is interested in liberation, and Bhagavad Bhakti, devotional service to the Lord, is above even liberation. Therefore, the process of devotional service, Krishna consciousness, is extremely difficult to understand. So people in general, and I'd say even those of us who are trying to be devotees, may really not understand the idea that devotional service is not for bhukti or mukti. It's not for sense gratification or for liberation. Most people on the planet who are religious for sense gratification, and some are religious for liberation. My dear Lord, thank you very much. Please give me a good family, give me a nice spouse, give me good children, give me money, give me prestige in society. Like Shanda and Amarka were really worried about their name and fame. Give me this. And they're smart enough to know that they're better situated to get those things through God than through atheism. But their purpose in going to God is that their purpose is not love. Like someone who marries for money, right? They marry a rich person so they can get rich, so they can share in their money. They don't have any love for the person. And so this is why people take up religion in general. They don't really understand love. Okay, in 19 to 24, in this section, we have Prahlad, the lead up to, and Prahlad describing the 9 processes of bhakti to Hiranyakashipu. So in 19, Prahlad's going to his father for the second time, and his teachers think we were successful. They weren't able to discern that Prahlad continued to have bhakti. They thought it was gone. Prahlad, and again, this is very important in the context of the whole story, Prahlad did not have, at this point, external manifestations in the school to his teachers. So then in text 20 to 21, we find Hiranyakashipu feeling all this affection and great joy at seeing his son, and he gives him blessings. So he smelled his head. So this is a very natural thing. You know, if you have a young child, you're taller than the child. So if you lean over the child, you may naturally smell their head. And if you pick them up on your lap, you know, you're holding them in your lap, and their head is going to be here. And as you're hugging them, you smell their head. And little children have a very nice, if they're raised properly, they have a very nice smell. Like little babies that are just breastfed, their bodily odor, even their poop kind of smells sort of yogurty, and they have a nice smell about them, and you know, they're not yet contaminated by things. They don't have a bad body odor that happens in puberty, and they have a nice smell. And so this is part of the pleasure that the parents get from the children, is how the child smells. So then in 22, Hiranyakashipu, he's full of affection. He's full of affection. He basically forgot about Prahlad's previous thing. He thought, oh, this was some outside influence. It's not very important. Just like any parent, you know, if the child says something outrageous or misbehaves, and you chalk it up to something else, oh, they're tired, or maybe they heard this from another child or something, and you let it go. So he had let it go. He was just full of affection. He's crying with affection. And he's saying, what did you learn from your gurus? So Prahlad thought of Narada. Hiranyakashipu was thinking of Shanda and Amarka, and Prahlad was thinking of Narada, which I find quite humorous. Okay, then we have text 23 to 24, which is a very important verse in the Bhagavatam, which is the description of the 9 items of devotional service. Now, we know that Srila Rupa Goswami also gives these 9 items in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Then he also has this expansion of 64 items. So the 64 items can be categorized under the 9. So Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur says in this purport, Bhakti should be performed directly, adha, not with any prerequisite gyan or karma. Being offered to the Lord, it is then performed. It is not performed and then offered to the Lord. This is Sridhar Swami's explanation. Or there is another meaning. If bhakti, after being offered to the Lord, is performed with the aim of giving Vishnu pleasure, without taking the results for one's own pleasure, which would not be anyabhilasita sunyam, then I consider it uttam bhakti, uttama aditam. So from the beginning, it's offered to the Lord for the Lord's pleasure. And Prabhupada makes the same point in his purport, where he says, fruit of workers first perform some pious activities and then formally or officially offer the results to Vishnu. The real devotee, however, first offers his surrender to Krishna with his body, mind, and words, and then uses his body, mind, and words for the service of Krishna as Krishna desires. Now, we do not have time in this class, but the 2 types of surrender, Sharanarpati and Atmanivedanam. Sharanarpati is described as body, mind, and words. Atmanivedanam is described as body, mind, and soul. So here this is referring to surrender as in that category. So here we see the difference, you know, somebody officially doing religion, they're doing something for their sense gratification, and their mood is their own enjoyment. I mean, just think about like with cooking. Okay, so you're cooking and you're thinking, well, what do I want to eat? I'd like to eat such and such. And your mood is your own enjoyment. And then you officially, formally, you officially, formally offer it to the Lord. And then with his permission and his grace, one eats the food. Or if one is cooking, what would Krishna like to eat? What can I make for his pleasure? Obviously, you want to also cook something that the devotees will eat. So, or your family members will eat, or you will eat. But what can I cook for Krishna's pleasure? Your offering, your cooking, your preparation, your shopping, your everything, all of that you're doing when you're offering it, you're like, Krishna, I hope you enjoy eating this. I hope you enjoy the food. You meditate on Krishna actually eating the food. And then you're very joyfully accepting his remnants in this, as grace and as mercy and love. So this is the difference. Okay, Prabhupada writes in the purport also, Pumsarpita Vishnu. The word Pumsa means by all living entities. There are no distinctions permitting only a man or only a Brahmana to offer devotional service to the Lord. Everyone can do so. So Prabhupada writing only a man, keep in mind that when Prabhupada wrote his purports, that the word man in English referred to humans, not just to males. So Prabhupada could have intended here meaning also women, and he could have intended meaning also all living entities, not just humans. Okay, Prabhupada also writes that if a devotee performs only one of these 9 without deviation, he can obtain the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sometimes it is found that when one performs one of the processes, other processes are mixed with it. That is not improper for a devotee. When devotee executes any one of the 9 processes, Navalakshana, this is sufficient. The other 8 processes are included. So this is a very, very important point. So one can become perfect in devotional service by any one of the 9 processes. Same is true for any 4 of the 64 items. So one can become perfect just by smelling the incense offered to the Lord, just by taking the Charnamrita offered to the Lord, just by following the Rath Yatra cart, and so forth. And any one process automatically, in some sense, includes the others. They're not exactly distinct processes. And even if they're obviously mixed, that's fine. It's not like you say, okay, well, I have to do pure Smarana, or I have to do pure Archana, or I have to do, it's natural for there to be some mixture, even very obviously and externally. All right, let's go through each of these. And first we're going to look, and I'd like you, as we go through this, I'm going to be asking you in the second half of the class, go to that. Okay, I'm going to be asking you to be writing something about each of the 9 items, like just a little something. So I'm going to be going over right now the main points that Prabhupada makes. It's a long purport. So for hearing Shravanam, Prabhupada makes the point, as he does everywhere, that this is the beginning of bhakti, that bhakti has to begin with hearing, that it is essential, and that hearing the name leads to realization of the Lord's form, qualities, and associates. I was just hearing Prabhupada say this in a class this morning about chanting, that as soon as you say Krishna's name or hear Krishna's name, immediately you think about Krishna's form, qualities, and associates. It's interesting that Prabhupada says associates here. That's something said by Srila Jiva Goswami in another context. And Prabhupada says most important is to hear from the Bhagavatam. Then he also says we can hear and meditate on any form according to our attraction. So some people may feel more attracted to Krishna, some to Ram, some to baby Krishna, some to teenage Krishna, etc. Prabhupada also said we should hear from those who are similar to our own attraction. So we talked about that a little bit yesterday, about this idea of friendship between people who are similar. Chanting, kirtanan. Prabhupada says here it's recommended to be very loud. Of course, not so loud that we get ear damage, please. Prabhupada refers to the Trinadapi verse that our ability to talk about Krishna is related to humility. Without humility, we want to talk about things related to ourselves. It's very difficult to talk about someone else all the time if we're proud. So only when we're completely humble can we really talk about Krishna. And of course, the Trinadapi verse, the measure of humility is whether or not we're relishing being respected. Says chanting is good for everyone. There's no qualifications to chant, that it's the only means in Kali Yuga, that it's the principal method of advancing in spiritual life, even if you take up other methods. And he said that we should chant according to Shastra. We shouldn't make up, some imaginary meanings of chanting. We shouldn't make up some imaginary chants. And he talks about avoiding the 10 offenses in chanting. He lists the 10 offenses in this purport. And Prabhupada says, if we commit these offenses, we should go on chanting. Now, there's a real parallel between this and Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where Srila Rupa Goswami also lists and explains the 10 offenses on chanting. And Prabhupada says we should chant 24 hours a day. One of my godbrothers, who's also the father of my oldest son's wife, Gopavindapal Prabhu, told me that before computers, he did thorough research in Prabhupada's books and Prabhupada's lectures, morning walks. What were the points that Srila Prabhupada made the most often? What did he repeat the most often? And one of the things he came up with was, he said, what is the adverb that Srila Prabhupada uses most often in relationship to chanting? And it was some form of the word always. So that one should be chanting 24 hours a day. Of course, a little difficult to chant while you're sleeping, unless the chanting has become fully integrated. We have, even Christian monks talk about prayers that become part of your heartbeat. Then remembering, smaranam. So Prabhupada says, when the core of one's heart is cleansed by hearing and chanting, then we can do proper remembering. And here he gives a description of the 5 stages of meditation. Now, the 5 stages of meditation are mentioned elsewhere. The perhaps main place we could say is in Nectar of Instruction, Text 8, Purport. And I don't know if we'll have time in today's class, but something that you might want to do is compare Srila Prabhupada's description here with that description. We might have time in today's class. Now, it's a little tricky to compare it because there's 5 stages of meditation, and the third part of it has 5 subparts. So sometimes when they're talking about the 5 parts, they're talking about the 5 subparts of the third stage. Sometimes they're talking about the 5 main parts, and sometimes they're talking about both. So how does and the stages of meditation is another way we can understand the process and the progress of bhakti, just like we talk about Shraddha to Prema, or various kinds of Kanistha, Madhyama, and Uttama. So another way of understanding is the 5 stages of meditation. So again, those of you who are very familiar with these 5 stages may find the particular description here interesting. So Prabhupada gives the first one: conducting research into the worship of a particular form of the Lord. Second one: concentrating the mind on one subject and withdrawing the mind's activities of thinking, feeling, and willing from all other subjects. Third, concentrating upon a particular form of the Lord. This is called meditation. Fourth, concentrating one's mind continuously on the form of the Lord. This is called Dhruva Smriti, or perfect meditation. And 5, awakening a liking for concentration upon a particular form. This is called samadhi, or trance. Mental concentration, and please note the word mental. Mental concentration upon particular pastimes of the Lord in particular circumstances is also called remembrance. Therefore, samadhi trance can be possible in 5 different ways in terms of one's relationship. So Prabhupada there is talking about rasa. And he's saying, according to one's rasa, Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya, one is going to meditate on particular pastimes in particular circumstances. So there's going to be 5 different tastes. Okay, going on to worship of the Lord, Padasevanam. And Prabhupada says, according to one's taste and strength. This is a recurring point, principle throughout both Vaidhi and Raganuga Bhakti. According to one's taste and strength, that we all do service to the Lord according to our taste. What is it that we really relish in bhakti? What is it that we really relish in bhakti? What's our particular taste and strength? And strength. You know, some people may be able to do a Dandavat Parikrama of Govardhan Hill, and other people can't even do a walking parikrama of Govardhan Hill. What's our strength? What are we able to do? So what gives us pleasure in bhakti, and what are we able to do? Being intensely attached to thinking of the Lord's lotus feet. Prabhupada also says that Padasevana includes visiting and serving holy places. So we know of some devotees who really like this item of devotional service, and Indradyumna Swami comes to mind. He loves going to holy places. He's constantly going to various holy places and constantly taking people there. And it's just obviously one of his greatest pleasures in devotional service. And we don't see that for everybody. It's not that we don't see that every devotee is doing that. But we see some devotees, they really love just visiting various holy places. This also includes serving devotees, because devotees are situated at the Lord's lotus feet. So service to the devotees is in this category of worshiping the Lord's lotus feet. And this includes serving Tulsi Devi. So when we're serving Tulsi Devi, that's considered Padasevanam. Okay, next item is Archana, deity worship. And Prabhupada says one must learn from a guru. So this is extremely important. Generally, Srila Prabhupada did not want people worshiping the deity even at home unless they were initiated. Generally. He did sometimes talk about distributing Gaura-Nitai deities to the general public and asking them just to offer some incense every day. So, you know, there are some exceptions. Prabhupada says we should follow the Narada Pancharatra. And you notice even in the verse, Prabhupada says with the 16 items. So there's other places like in the Chaitanya Charitamrita and various places, it's mentioned that worship has to be at least with 5 items every day. So 5, 16, or can be up to 64 items. Very few people use all 64 items in worship every day. I worship my own Shilas with 16 items every day, but most of those are just mantra and water. So I'm not actually offering the item, like offering padya or foot wash. There's a particular combination of things to make for foot wash, so I just offer water and say, here's your foot wash, without having the actual items. Or like, here's your clothing. Of course, I'm not going to put clothing on Shilas, but for there, I just offer a flower as symbolic of putting on clothing and meditate on it being clothing. So one should follow the Narada Pancharatra. One should not make up one's own kind of deity worship, shouldn't be concocted. And Prabhupada specifically says that deity worship is for initiated devotees. And then he says it's especially for the householders. And Prabhupada says it's compulsory. It's compulsory. Prabhupada makes this very heavy statement in this purport, where he says, Grahasta devotees, however, are generally engaged in material activities, and therefore, if they do not take to deity worship, their falling down is positively assured. That's a heavy statement. Deity worship means following the rules and regulations precisely. I'm sorry this is heavy, but it's heavy. Any household or devotee circumstantially unable to worship the deity must at least see the deity worship. In this way, he may achieve success also. So, folks, householders should be initiated. They should worship the deity according to the rules. Precisely, Prabhupada says. We see in so many homes, the deities are just kept as a karma stamping out machine for food. They're just like decorative items. There's no regular worship, or the regular worship is very haphazard. That's not the idea. The idea is that the deity should be worshipped properly. And the idea that the deity is the center of the home, and by making the deity the center of the home, the whole home is transformed. Now you can say, well, I'm not initiated yet. What do I do? At least you can put up some pictures, and you can have some kind of regulative, at least the 5 items. That's very, very simple. The 5 items every day. It's extremely simple. It does not take very long. It's not a big deal, but it still needs to be done properly. If for some reason that can't be done at all, then you go to a temple where you see the deity worship. Prabhupada says it should be done oneself. Don't hire others to do it for you. As sometimes we see this, Prabhupada at least ran into this in India, rich people who hire brahmanas to worship their deities. And it's, yeah. I mean, you could have other people worship your deities when you're traveling, obviously. Prabhupada says observing festivals is included, and he says it's compulsory for householders to observe festivals. Then avoiding offenses to the deity, and Prabhupada lists the offenses in deity worship, which are again also listed in Nectar Devotion. And Prabhupada says if we commit any of these offenses, and he gives several items you can do if you commit these offenses. You can read a chapter of Bhagavad Gita. That's always my go-to. If I inadvertently commit some offense to the deities, I read a Bhagavad Gita chapter. Or read the 1,000 names of Vishnu. Or you can pray to Tulsi. Or you can worship Shalagram Shila. Of course, I'm already worshiping Shalagram Shila, and if I commit an offense, it's usually to my Shalagram Shila, so I don't see how I can worship. So therefore, I read a Bhagavad Gita chapter. Or you can fast for a day in a holy place and bathe in the Ganga. So these are the alternatives. Read a chapter of Bhagavad Gita, read Vishnu Sahasranam, pray to Tulsi, worship Shalagram, or fast in a holy place and bathe in the Ganga. And then Prabhupada also says that one can worship in the mind. So I have to do this when sometimes when I'm traveling, because a worship of Shalagram is supposed to be done before noon every day. And one is not supposed to eat before completing one's worship. So sometimes I'm on an airplane where I'm traveling all night and all the next morning. And there's no way that I'm going to take my Shilas out of the bag and put them on the tray in the airplane and worship them there. And that's not going to happen. So then I have to perform the worship mentally, to go through all the items mentally. Or sometimes women ask, when they're in their state of contamination, what should they do? And I said, well, you can always go through the worship mentally. Mental worship is, by the way, often more difficult than physical worship. Now, one can also just worship mentally exclusively. And there's this story of the Brahmana who did that, where he didn't have means for deity worship, and so he just did mental worship every day. And this particularly can be done if one's a renunciate and has no home, that one can do this mental worship. Then going to prayers and obeisances. Vandanam can be understood as prayers in the mind, prayers with the mouth, or prayers with the body. Prayers with the body means offering obeisances. I have a whole class I give on Vandanam. Someday I'll do seminars on each of these 9. But you can do Vandanam this simple with folding the hands, with what's called 5-pointed obeisances, where you're kneeling on your knees, and then full Dandavat, which is 8-pointed obeisances. And Prabhupada talking about it in this purport says, one who feels influenced by the Lord's qualities in various activities offers prayers to the Lord. And then he says one should avoid the offenses in prayers, and here the list is of offenses in offering obeisances. So it's in terms of bodily obeisances. Then becoming a servant, dasya. So Prabhupada says one who understands that he is a servant can deliver others. And this is such a nice quote. I was talking with a very dear friend of mine in Vrindavan, who was saying that she didn't want to have the mood that I'm a preacher. She wanted to have the mood that I'm a servant. And so I shared this quote with her, that the real preacher is one who's feeling I'm a servant. I'm a servant of the Lord. I'm a servant of my guru. I'm a servant of the people that I am teaching. Then Prabhupada says something very interesting, which we'll talk about in the second half of the class. He says, quote, if one simply continues to think that he's an eternal servant of Krishna, even without performing any other process of devotional service, he can attain full success, for simply by this feeling, one can perform all 9 processes of devotional service. Wow. If I just have this mood, I'm Krishna's servant, I'm Krishna's servant, Krishna's servant, even if I don't appear to be doing anything else, everything is performed. Becoming a friend, Prabhupada talks about this here, as this can mean living in a temple to see the Lord personally, having intense love, and where the opulence of worship diminishes. So that's how Prabhupada describes. I also have a whole seminar I give on what does this friendship mean in VIHE and in Raganuga. And surrendering everything. Now, it's interesting that although Prabhupada referred to body, mind, and words, which is samarpitam, here he's defining it as atmanivedanam, which is actually body, mind, and soul. And so here Prabhupada talks about dedication of body and or soul. So I use my body as the Lord desires. I use my mind as the Lord desires. And I am willing to take birth in any species of life as the Lord desires. So no motive other than to serve and please the Lord, and no anxiety for one's own maintenance. That doesn't mean we don't do anything for our own maintenance, but we don't have any anxiety for it. Srila Rupa Goswami says that this is very difficult to do, that it's rarely achieved, but it's something that's very, very sweet. Okay, just a few interesting points before we take a break. That in the first paragraph of the purport to 2324, Prabhupada quotes Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati for a summary explanation of each of the 9 processes. That in 23 to 24, Prabhupada gives a definition of pure bhakti, anyabhilasita sunyam. We already mentioned that the 5 stages of meditation are described very differently than in the Nectar of Instruction. And they're also described differently in Bhakti Sandarbha or Jaiva Dharma Harinam Chintamani. Interesting here that the story of the Brahmana doing mental meditation with the sweet rice is in the category of Archana. And in Nectar Devotion, Srila Prabhupada tells exactly the same story, but in the area of Smaranam. And then just to note that there's a little bit more different and more complex discussion of these 9 items in the Nectar of Devotion. So again, we're going to take a break until the top or the bottom of the hour, depending on what time zone you're in. So just like what we did yesterday. So that will be until 8 o'clock Eastern time. For those of you on European time, it will be till 2 in the afternoon. For those of you in India, it will be till 6:30. Okay, so we'll meet again then. And please take an actual break, get up and move. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So I wanted now to do some interactive things. First of all, I'd like to ask, why did Shanda and Amarka threaten and chastise Prahlad Maharaj? What was their motive? What was their reason for threatening and chastising him? And that's, if everyone could just write that in the chat. That's from text 18. Why did they chastise and threaten him? But specifically, why did they use chastisement and threats?
Because they are not interested in liberation.
Right, just put it in the chat right now. Okay, I want you to think about why that method. Why did they use that method? Now, there's so many teaching methods. They could have just used like games. A lot of nice thoughts here in the chat. Everybody, I'd like everyone to write something in the chat. Okay, so Ikanta says these were the methods used with disobedient citizens. Right. We find them using a little bit of the other 3 methods, but they're really going into that one. And so they were thinking the other 3 wouldn't work. I think this idea that Stuti Priya Radha, and Asit also, and who else was brought this up? Shri Radha Govinda. That they were scared. They themselves were scared. They were scared of their name and fame. They were scared that they were going to get into trouble with Hiranyakashipu. You remember they did kind of. When Prahlad first said, go to the Vana, Hiranyakashipu turned his anger to them. So it's very common that when people are feeling scared and insecure, that they then get angry with others. Right? It's kind of a, like your boss yells at you at work, and so you go home and yell at your spouse, and then your spouse yells at the kid, and the kid yells at the dog. That's like, right? So, Hiranyakashipu yelled at them and threatened them, and they turn around and threaten Prahlad. And I think some of these other things people said is also relevant, that they wanted to set an example. But I really believe that their feeling of helplessness, their own fear, they really just didn't know what to do with this kid. They're putting on a brave face to Hiranyakashipu, and they're going to do that again later on. Oh, yeah, we have it all under control. But they actually don't have it all under control, and they know they don't have it all under control on one level, so they're acting like this. All right. And Hiranyakashipu, he says to Prahlad, please tell me what is the best knowledge. That's the question that prompts Prahlad Maharaj talking about the 9 processes of devotional service. So we're talking about knowledge. What do you know? Usually when we think about knowledge, we think about information. It's possible to categorize knowledge into 3 areas, right? Information, skills, and values. Like, what do you know? Well, I know, the population of China, perhaps, or I know the gross national product of Peru, or I know what color tiles are in somebody's bathroom. That's like information. And skills can also be knowledge. Like, I know how to offer arati, or I know how to drive a car, or I know how to make puris or something like that. I have some skills. And then values, I know how to be honest. I know how to be respectful. That can be another kind of knowledge. I know what respect feels like. That can be another kind of knowledge. So Hiranyakashipu asked him, what's the best knowledge? And he replies with Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam. Why do you think he would call it the best knowledge? Some thoughts. So we have Bhagavad Gita 9.2. Very nice answer. Rajavidya, Rajaguya. This is the best knowledge. Anybody would like to, either in the chat or raising your hand, think about why this is the best knowledge? We get knowledge only if we're humble. Yes, you're looking at Bhagavad Gita then 13, 8 through 12. By the way, it's really nice to teach Bhakti Vedanta students, because I know you've already passed your Bhakti Vaibhava and your Bhakti Shastri, and it's just really nice. Often when you're just teaching a regular class, like, people don't know the Shastra at all, and so if you ask questions, they're just kind of like, well, I don't know. Anybody else, if you want to raise your hand or write in the chat, why Prahlad would think these 9 processes is the best knowledge, particularly related to knowledge. Okay, only by bhakti can we truly know the Lord, 1855. I like that. I like that. And as we were studying yesterday, when we know the Lord, we know the essence of everything. And we can only know. That's nice. I like this too. What devotees do to revive their dormant relationship with Krishna, how we're going to really know who I am, what is myself. Okay, any other thoughts? All right. So I mentioned already about the Shudras having this quality of service. And this is mentioned in Bhagavatam 3.6.33, which is situated on the legs of the Shudras who satisfy the Lord by service. So I'd like to pull up 3.6.33. Because it's to share this. Okay. So here, thereafter service was manifested from the legs of the personality of Godhead. I'm having to move this over. For the sake of perfecting the religious function, situated on the legs of the Shudras who satisfy the Lord by service. So Prabhupada writes here in this purport, service is the real constitutional occupation of all living entities. The living entities are meant to render service to the Lord, and they can attain religious perfection by this service attitude. One cannot attain religious perfection simply by speculating to attain theoretical knowledge. Going to the second paragraph. It is clearly said here that the principle of service was generated from the legs of the Lord for the sake of perfecting the religious process. But this transcendental service is different from the idea of service in the material world. Let's go on to the third paragraph. It is actually better to be a Shudra than to be a Brahmana and not develop the service attitude, because that attitude alone satisfies the Lord. Every living being, even if he be a Brahmana by qualification, must take to the transcendental service of the Lord. Both the Bhagavad Gita and the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam confirm that the service attitude is the perfection of the living entity. A Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra can perfect his occupational duties only by rendering service to the Lord. A Brahmana is supposed to know this fact due to his perfection in Vedic wisdom. So this is just very interesting. The Prabhupada writes here, it's actually better to be a Shudra than to be a Brahmana and not develop the service attitude. And we have that this service attitude is particularly present in the Shudra Varna. You know, many times we're very critical of the Shudra Varna, specifically because of the service attitude. That because in the Shudra Varna you serve a customer or a client, you're being paid a salary and you're trying to please them, that therefore you don't have that much facility for independence. But this is also the glory of that Varna. Each of the four Varnas has their glories. And it's just, I'd just like to ask you, what do you think are the glories of each of the Varnas? So what of each of the Varnas brings that Varna close to Bhakti, or can bring the Varna close to Bhakti? For Shudras, it's their natural service mentality, which they can very easily apply in Bhakti. So some thoughts about the other Varnas, the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. What's the glory of their Varna that can naturally bring them to Bhakti? Some thoughts? You can raise your hand or write in the chat as you prefer. The Brahmana, their truthfulness brings them close to the absolute truth. Vaishya's cow protection, Krishna's favorite animal. Protect people so they can do devotional service without getting distracted. Yes, okay. Think of something that's really, really like directly connected. Justice and protection, but how does that really connect? Brahmana helps in bhakti by guiding others through spiritual practices. No duplicity. Brahmana knowledge, okay. Okay, Kshatriyas you're talking about, again, this is sort of indirect. All right, fund to giving money to places, all right. Supporting wealth that supports others to do their bhajan. Okay, but let's think of it a little bit more direct. So let's think of the quality of the Vaishya. The quality of the Vaishyas is that they're taking care of the land and the cows, right? They're creating wealth. They're creating resources. So who is the land? The land is Bhumi. Who is Bhumi? Bhumi is the Lord's wife. So the Vaishyas are directly, or Lakshmi, even if they're dealing with money, Lakshmi is directly the Lord's wife. So the Vaishyas can, what can easily bring them to bhakti is if they have the mentality that I'm serving the Lord's wife. I'm serving Srimati Radharani. I'm serving Bhumi Devi. I'm serving Lakshmi Devi. Then we're talking about the Brahmanas studying the scriptures. So the Brahmanas are, at least some occupation of Brahmanas, they're directly studying truth. So they're studying the scriptures, or they're gaining knowledge in the service of truth. So they're directly involved in pleasing the Lord like that. And then the Kshatriyas are acting, we find throughout the Shastra, the Kshatriyas are always compared to God in human form. That the Lord is the father of everyone. And the Kshatriyas are acting as if they were the father and mother of the society. They're directly acting as the Lord's representatives. That's why the Kshatriyas, the men and the women, they're doing the Lord's work on earth to take care of the living entities. Kind of, if you're parents and you hire someone to watch your children, you hire a babysitter, then that person is doing the work of God. So we're looking at this connection to bhakti, that each varna has this connection to bhakti. The Kshatriyas are also establishing dharma, right? Krishna says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhutanam adharmasya. So the Kshatriyas are the ones responsible. The Brahmanas may define what is dharma, but it's only the Kshatriyas who actually can uphold dharma for the Lord. All right, I have a very, very heavy question here. So if we look at text 16 and 19, Prabhupada's talking about the 4 ways of dealing with persons who quote, disobediently agitates against the government, unquote. Now, if we want to establish an ideal society, if that's our aim, is not just to have our own little separate Hare Krishna movement, but if we're trying to transform the world and create an ideal society, then we would want ideal governments run by ideal kshatriyas. And I would assume, maybe my assumption is wrong, but I would assume that we also, in an ideal society, would want to have freedom of speech and not punishment of political enemies. You know, what the whole impetus for the democracies of the world, and maybe not the whole, but a primary impetus, was that the royalty of Europe was punishing political enemies. So people were put in prison or executed not because they were criminals, but because they opposed the government. And, you know, we have, like in Ramchandra's time, where we have that one person, I forget who he was, Washerman or something, who was criticizing Ram's dealing with Sita. We don't find that he's punished. We find the Brahmana who criticizes Krishna and Balaram because his children died right after being born. The concept that you could go to the king and you could complain. So it seems that there was a provision in Vedic society for freedom of speech. I remember when we had President Ronald Reagan in the United States, he made this joke, and he said he was talking with someone in Russia, and he said, well, you know, America is superior to Russia because someone can stand in front of the White House and say President Ronald Reagan is a fool. And the Russians said, well, we can do that in Russia as well. And President Reagan said, really? He said, yeah, we can go in front of the Kremlin and say President Ronald Reagan is a fool. So we see that there are oppressive regimes in the world where you cannot say anything against the government. Places like North Korea, Turkmenistan, for example, they really restrict the access that people have to news media so that nobody can say anything against the government. But here Srila Prabhupada says in purport to 19 that if he still continues to make political agitation after using the first three methods, he said the king should employ, he uses the word should, the king should employ argumentum ad baculam, severe punishment, by putting him in jail or placing him before a firing squad. And then Prabhupada also says, it is essential for a student who is going to be a ruler or king to learn the four diplomatic principles, which are sama, the process of pacifying, dana, the process of giving money in charity, beta, the principle of dividing, and danda, the principle of punishment. So I'm wondering if we're going to train our own devotees who want to be kshatriyas, and if we're looking at an ideal system, what would this mean as far as people who are political enemies and who are not pacified with the three first ways of pacification? Okay, I'd like, please raise your hands, and I'd like, this is a difficult discussion. I think I know the answer myself, but I'm not sure I know the answer myself, and I would be very much eager to hear your thoughts. Yes, Shri Govinda.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understood exactly your question, but I was thinking that if we emphasize leaders, cultivating leaders within our ISKCON movement who have spiritual integrity and they are equipped with jurisprudence, diplomacy, and then they can bring about social transformation through example rather than maybe, coercion or some sort of a demonstration. I don't know how you say it, but yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Okay. My question basically is, it sounds from this purport that Srila Prabhupada is promoting the imprisonment or the execution of political enemies who cannot be neutralized by other means. That's what it sounds like. That appears to be, and it sounds like he's saying it twice. So is that what Srila Prabhupada means? Is Srila Prabhupada advocating that we have forms of government where political opponents who cannot be subjugated with money and position and flattery and law are jailed or executed? And what is that really the kind of society that we are suggesting? That's the essence of my question. Advaita Krishna Prabhu.
Well, Srila Prabhupada talking about Gandhi, and he said non-violence. This is ridiculous. It doesn't have place in politics or diplomacy. And it actually ruined, according to how people are saying India now, policies of Gandhi actually ruined India to a lot of point. So non-violence, this is what it is really here, because you cannot apply danda. Danda means punishment. So if you cannot apply punishment in politics and diplomacy, how are you going to? Because you're always going to have some unruly elements. So Prabhupada was dead against the policies of non-violence of Gandhi.
Okay, but would you want to apply violence towards your political enemies? They're not lawbreakers, they're political enemies. Sitarani?
I was thinking, Mataji, that there has to be some order in the society. So what Prabhupada is suggesting, basically punishment as a last resort. But after employing the other three methods of Sam, Dam, and Bhed, if nothing else is working, then one is forced to go to the last resort, that is danda. And it is because just for political freedom or freedom of speech, we cannot allow such people to just carry on and break the order in the society.
Oh, okay. I'm just thinking, like, in America, we have freedom of assembly and freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances. So you can, you have to peaceably assemble. You can't, threaten to overthrow the government. Asit Prabhu.
Yeah, Mataji, what I understand is that this Dandaniti is one of the very favorite subject in every kingdom. This is what Chanakya has also mentioned about it in Arthashastra. And we have established examples of Yudhishthira Maharaj and Amrish Maharaj. Both of them were great devotees, but at the same time, they were maintaining their kingdom nicely. So, without having the support of all these four elements, including Danda, the system can't work. And the people like Bhim and Arjun were ensuring it. I mean, they're very powerful, as well as devotees of the Lord. So there has to be balance. So I think it is to be applied. You can't do without it.
Okay, again, we're not talking about criminals. We're talking about political opponents.
Yeah, it's in the same manner, Mataji. It's meant to be once you become Samrat. So Samrat means that by doing Ashwamedh Yaga, if they are trying to come forward, so then they are suppressed also, because otherwise you can't do Ashwamedh Yagya. The Lord Krishna made Yudhishthira Maharaj do 2 Ashwamedh Yagya, and it's not possible to do Ashwamedh Yagya without being prepared to fight with your enemies.
Okay, let's look here, because again, I see that's like other kingdoms that are opposing you. So if we look, okay, here, it is essential for a student who's going to be a ruler or king to learn the 4 diplomatic principles. There is always rivalry between a king and his citizens. So this is not talking about rival kings, and it's not talking about criminals. Therefore, when a citizen agitates the public against the king, the duty of the king is to call him and try to pacify him with sweet words, saying, "You are very important in the state. Why should you disturb the public with some new cause for agitation?" If the citizen is not pacified, the king should then offer him some lucrative post as a governor or minister, any post that draws a high salary, so that he may be agreeable. We see Donald Trump is doing this. He's taking his political enemies and giving them posts. If the enemy still goes on agitating the public, the king should try to create dissension in the enemy's camp. But if he still continues, the king should employ argumentum ad baculum, severe punishment, by putting him in jail or placing him before a firing squad. So it's talking about political agitators in society. It's not talking about other kings, and he's not talking about criminals. It's talking about people who make, okay, you say demons and demoniac civilization. Well, he's talking about citizens who are making propaganda against the government.
In a way, we're trying to compare, autocracies to democracies here. We're comparing 2 different things.
Okay, but I'm also asking, as far as even autocracy, I gave some example of kings. Sorry, I got to plug in my mic. Gave some example in the Bhagavatam of kings who did allow people to criticize the government. That you had, Ram allowed the washerman to criticize the government. In fact, he made it, he changed his whole policy towards his family because of that criticism. Okay, I like what you're saying, Sitarani, that if the citizens by their agitation make the working of the government impossible, so if they're actually interfering with the working of the government, but it seems to me that point could be really abused. Murari Prabhu?
Hare Krishna. The freedom, we talk about only the punishment, Samadhana, Beda, Danda. Danda we are talking about. But on the other hand, we are talking about a freedom. The freedom got a concentric cycles. What extent the freedom? What extent the freedom we can keep? And beyond that, what we cannot go. This is all man-made, mostly. What is the freedom in a government, especially in the government? This is a freedom. Now you cannot cross the yellow line in the road, so that you will be punished. When this can be, it is sometime it will be there, the rule that sometime it will not be there. So it is a man-made this thing. What you can call it as a circle. Beyond that, somebody cannot go beyond. This is the rules. With that, the punishments also accordingly. Sometimes the punishments were very heavy, sometimes punishments were less. That's why this court judgment also, they will be referring, yeah, earlier they said this, now they are telling this, so we can do this. Like that, they are going on changing the regulations and rules. So it is co-relevant with the punishment as well as that, what you call it is our freedom.
Okay.
Yes, what my feeling.
How would we envision, and if we had a perfect government, people who criticize the government?
That perfection, the meaning of perfection, what to extend. Because somebody mentioned that Gandhiji earlier, he was a freedom leader, he was a non-violentist, so many things they said. Nowadays they are criticizing him because he is the man who is in charge of partition between Pakistan and India.
Okay. Okay, so here is Shaktimanta is saying that Lord Karam accepted his own criticism. But yeah, I mean, he accepted the criticism. He didn't kill the guy or imprison him. I mean, I'm thinking about, like in America where we had racially discriminatory laws where, Black people had to drink out of different water fountains and ride in the back of the bus. And there was mass protests against this, peaceful protests, and the government reacted violently. So the government reacted with, water cannon and arrests and things like this. And eventually the laws were changed. We talk about how Mahaprabhu had civil disobedience against the Qazi who was trying to prohibit Sankirtan. So, do we want a situation where people cannot make agitation against the government? Again, the idea is that the only people who should be imprisoned or executed are people who are criminals, not political agitators. We had that's what Hiranyakashipu was doing. Hiranyakashipu was punishing anyone who disagreed with him politically. Kamsa was also doing this. Vena was also. The examples in the Bhagavatam of the rulers who did this are all demons. And the examples of the devotees are the opposite, that in the Bhagavatam, that they actually welcomed political opponents and they welcomed criticism of the government. Sitarani, yes, further thoughts?
Yes, I was thinking, Mataji, that when Prabhupada is writing that, he's writing more from the perspective of the reason behind, that disagreement. Is it really a valid reason, or is it really just to create trouble? So depending on the motivation of a particular agitation, then one has to kind of react accordingly.
Okay, that could be. Any other thoughts? I mean, these are exactly the kind of statements that are ideal to take through a whole hermeneutical process. And it's interesting, when we put together the course on hermeneutics, I didn't think about this. I was collecting, and I collected from a lot of devotees, what are difficult statements from the Shastra or from our acharyas or from Srila Prabhupada? And somehow I didn't think of this. And when I was preparing for these classes and I ran into this, I'm like, whoa, this is definitely a statement that should be taken through a hermeneutical process. So I think many of you have attended the course on hermeneutics. So I'd like to ask, first of all, in the 4 categories of relationship to Siddhanta, what is this? Let's see if anybody remembers anything. The 4 ways of relating to Siddhanta. So which is this? Is it a restatement of Siddhanta? Is it a contextualization of Siddhanta? Is it supporting Siddhanta, or is it opposed to Siddhanta? Oh, is it a restatement of Siddhanta? I'm going to say contextualizing Siddhanta. Okay, contextualizing Siddhanta means that the statement is something that applies to everybody always, but is being given in a particular context. Is that the case here? Does this apply to everybody always, but it's in a particular context? I would say no. It is in a particular context, but is it something universal and eternal in a particular context? Is it a universal eternal statement? Is it a statement that's universally and eternally true, but applied to a particular context? No. Okay, so then we have 2 other choices. It's supporting Siddhanta or it's opposed to Siddhanta. Okay, we have a supporting and we have an opposed. If we look at the context, I spent weeks thinking about this statement and analyzing the statement, and it would be fruitful to do a whole what we call exegesis, where you take hermeneutics and go through the whole hermeneutical process for this statement, which I have not had time to do. I've just mentally been churning it. It seems to me that this is in the context of Shanda and Amarka punishing Prahlad, and it's in the context of Hiranyakashipu punishing Prahlad. I mean, look what Hiranyakashipu does. He tries to kill Prahlad because Prahlad is a political enemy. That's exactly what he's doing. And he's saying, it doesn't matter that he's my son, and it doesn't matter that he's 5. He should be killed if he's a political enemy. And Hiranyakashipu especially does this once Prahlad starts agitating the other students. So, as Prabhupada says, if the citizen is agitating others against the king. So, of course, he tries to kill Prahlad before Prahlad does that. He tries to kill Prahlad just when Prahlad, as we're about to see in the next verses, just when Prahlad was opposing him privately and silently, basically. Prahlad was only opposing him when asked. Otherwise, he was silent. So even for that, he tried to kill him. And once Prahlad created agitation among the other students, then Hiranyakashipu totally lost it. So I'm wondering if it's possible that Srila Prabhupada is describing the way the demons behave rather than the way that an ideal society should behave, although I have to kind of stretch to come out with that conclusion. It's the immediate way that it sounds to me is that Prabhupada is describing what ideal rulers should do, which my problem with that is that I wouldn't want to live in such a society. I wouldn't want to promote such a society. And we see that such societies in the world today are very unpleasant to live in. Also, we just see the examples in the Shastra of the devotee rulers. They don't behave like this with their political opponents at all. That's just not how they behave. And that the ones who behave with their political opponents in the Shastra are all demons. So that's where I'm coming. So I would say it's actually opposing Siddhanta. I would tend to go with that Prabhupada is presenting the rationale behind Shanda and Amarka and Hiranyakashipu's behavior rather than a prescription for devotees. That's how I would tend to go with this. Advaita Krishna Prabhu, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, what is the proposed principle of Siddhanta that we are either supporting or opposing here? It's from 2 angles, 2 different angles, from the devotee angle and from the demon's angle, right? So that's not even clear, I feel. Like you just said, yeah.
It really isn't
It's
clear.
not clear. It
No.
isn't clear, so we cannot say whether it is supporting. We cannot say.
It's very difficult to say. I'm sure we
Yeah.
could figure it out. I have confidence that we could figure it out. I have confidence in the hermeneutical process and that it would work to figure it out. I haven't gone through that whole process myself with this statement. I haven't given the time to that. It would be worth doing. Just like in ISKCON Communications Journal number 13, I went through two difficult statements, one from Prabhupada and one from the Bhagavatam itself, using the hermeneutical process to reach a resolution. And probably the same thing should be done with this statement. So we don't have time in this class. And again, I haven't put my time to it, but it would be something worth putting time to. That would what I brought up is my initial, the way I initially resolved it for myself. Whether that would stand up to a whole hermeneutic analysis or not, I don't know. I haven't put it through that. But that was the only way I could kind of find some peace with this. But it's something that really should be done. And I think, when we don't do that, I was thinking when I read it, how many times have I read the Bhagavatam and how many times have I read this, and somehow I didn't really notice it. And somehow this time I noticed, and I went, whoa, what is this? And I think all of you also made some very good points that, okay, it may be description, not prescription. Yes. Another point is that there definitely is a line where political agitation can become criminal. So there definitely is a line like that. I mean, we had it in America 4 years ago when Biden won the presidency, and we had people storming the Capitol with weapons and, threatening the president, threatening to kill the vice president. And that goes into criminality, and the people who were involved with that, many of them have been arrested and jailed and so forth. So, at least in the American Constitution, it says people can peacefully assemble for a redress of grievances in the government, that there's a way to oppose the government that doesn't disrupt the social order. And I think those points are also very valid that people brought up. All right. So I think both of those are true. I think that generally this is how demons behave. You don't agree with me, I'm going to put you in jail or kill you. And that for the devotees, there's also a line to cross. All right. We have 15 minutes. More to do than we can actually do. All right, let's see if you can write from memory without looking in the chat the 9 processes and the devotees who exemplify them. Any of you who live in Mayapur have a decidedly unfair advantage if you hang around Prabhupada's Samadhi, Pushpa Samadhi, because they're all there and you would see them all the time. All right, so just as fast as you can, from memory, without looking, each of the processes and who exemplifies them. Do not look at your notes. Do not look at the Shastra. Just write the process, person and process. Person and process. Okay, we have some of you who did all of them in one message. Very nice. Excellent. All right, very good. Very good. Okay. We'll do a sweet one. Well, let's see. We have another really heavy one, and then we have some sweet ones. Okay, so in verse, we'll do this heavy one first, and then we'll try to end with a sweet one. So in verse 18, Prabhupada talks about that people usually use religion for sense gratification. How can we stop this happening in our Hare Krishna movement? And what would the symptoms be of it? How would we know that this is happening, and what could we do to stop it?
Can you please repeat that?
Yes, in text 18, Srila Prabhupada talks about how people usually use religion for sense gratification. So that means that such is likely to happen in our International Society for Krishna Consciousness also. That we're not going to be immune from people wanting to use religion for sense gratification. 2 questions. What would be the symptoms of that? And what can we do to stop that or prevent it? Those are my 2 questions I'm throwing out to all of you. Please raise your hand if you have some thoughts on either or both of those. What would be the symptoms? How could we tell it's happening? And what could we do to stop it or prevent it? Yes, Sri Radha Govinda.
I have more the solution part. To
All
deepen
right.
personal sadhana, to study Srila Prabhupada books and cultivating introspection, humility, also associating with devotees and accountability, vulnerability, and to serve the mission and be in the mood of service.
Wow. All right. Someone else with some thoughts. Okay, we have competition, envy, quarrel, criticism. Of course, some competition, Prabhupada did say competition gives life. So there, Prabhupada did encourage certain kinds of competition. Okay, Asi, Prabhu.
I think it's important to have the focus on the 4th and 5th agenda. There's a moksha and prem. Until these things are there, you can't stop it.
Oh, I like that. I really like that. And that answer is, bam, right on verse 18 that we're looking at. Because in verse 18, it said that Chanda and Marka were just looking at Dharma, Artha, Kama, and not moksha or bhakti. So at least moksha, and preferably bhakti. Okay, we have Leela Madhuri Lalita said symptoms are puja, pratishta, and labdha. Of course, those can be a little subtle. But yes, wanting worship, name, and fame. Okay. Advaita Krishna Prabhu.
A little bit radical, I would say. There's a book by Raghunath Das Goswami speaks about different categories of disciples, clearly explains Guru Bhogi, Guru Tyagi, Guru Sevi, big statements in it. Generally, when we come to enjoying in the religious movement or sense gratifications, it falls in the category of Guru Bhogi. And therefore, with disciples, we have to be trained to know what it means to be Guru Sevi. Otherwise, we will enjoy the opulence of the spiritual master, which is what happens when we enjoy sense gratification through our movement in Krishna consciousness. And a very long list of symptoms of a Guru Bhogi. It's a book that was a lot spoken by Madhavananda Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
You're making me a little introspective, and I'm thinking, so how much do I enjoy ISKCON and how much do I serve ISKCON? You know, how much do I'm like, oh, good, here's my spiritual father's property, lots of nice food and nice friends and nice music and nice
I didn't mean to say that.
No, that's good. That's good. So, you know, I have this nice room here on ISKCON property, and I'm enjoying my room. It's so cold here. I mean, yesterday I was out in the cold and I come in and I'm like, oh, I have a warm place to stay. You know, so am I Guru Bhogi? Am I saying, you know, I'm going to enjoy my guru's property, or am I Guru Sevi? So that's, I like that demarcation. I think it's a really, really nice demarcation. Leaders to adhere strictly to standards to guide with purity and inspire. That's a solution Prabhupada talked about a lot. To what extent the leaders were actually following the regulative principles. And he didn't just mean no illicit sex. That's also a problem. But he meant, you know, rising early, chanting 16 rounds, and so forth. All right. So now I want to end on a sweet note. So in verses, in the purport to 23 to 24, Prabhupada says, if we just have the feeling of being a servant, he writes that, the feeling of being a servant, we just have this feeling of being a servant, that then everything is accomplished. Maybe we'll actually find that. So let me share my screen so we can look at this statement. So under Dasyam, he says, there is the following statement in regard to assisting the Lord as a servant. After many, many thousands of births, when one comes to understand that he is an eternal servant of Krishna, one can deliver others from this universe. If one simply continues to think that he is an eternal servant of Krishna, even without performing any other process of devotional service, he can attain full success, for simply by this feeling, one can perform all 9 processes of devotional service. If we take this literally, this would mean one's not hearing about Krishna, one's not chanting about Krishna, one's not remembering Krishna's pastimes or forms. One is just thinking, just this feeling, I'm an eternal servant of Krishna. All the others are included and one becomes successful. Your thoughts? Yes, Asit Prabhu. And you can do chat or raising your hand as whatever you like. Yes, Asit Prabhu.
Yeah, that's a Swarup of Jiva actually, Jivera Swarup Hoy Nitya Krishna Das. So until one himself is in that Swarup, sort of eternally, how can he help liberate others until he himself is in that mood? It's not a theoretical situation. Coming on that means that's why, Jivera Swarup, Nit Das, Das means what? Mahaprabhu says, Kirtaniya Sadahari. If you have to chant always, you must be humble. You must be in that mood of humility. So I see that this is an essential platform to himself situate on in order to help others to do so.
Thank you so much. That was really sweet. I'm wondering how just having this feeling is enough. This is my main question when I read this is that's it? That's it? All I have to do is just, I'm Krishna's servant. 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 And if I just feel like that, everything else is accomplished. Sitarani, your thoughts?
If one really feels like one is a servant, then how do you not do anything? If you are really in the mood of a servant, then you will serve. So it doesn't matter, whether it is said like that one doesn't need to do anything. But if one is established in that mood, how can you stay without serving?
Well, that is the question, though, because Prabhupada seems to be saying that you're not doing some visible service.
Even Smaranam is a service, even all these 9 processes are service. So if one is established in that mode, that is also service.
Okay. That would assume that one's doing Smaranam, because Prabhupada is saying, even without performing any other processes, if you just think that way. It's a far out statement. Nilamani.
Yes, but at the end of the sentence, he says that, one can perform all 9 processes of devotional service. So just by feeling, and this is, in my perspective, often the lure or the trick we use to bring people into Krishna consciousness. If you have a new person, and I think Prabhupada did this too, you send them to the kitchen to clean pots. And before you know it, they're into the process and they start chanting and hearing and participating. So yes, that mood of service is a way of creating the desire to perform all 9 processes of devotional service.
Okay, so you're understanding this. That means that feeling leads you to the other processes.
Yes, it leads you and motivates you, I suppose, yes.
Okay. Again, if I'm going to look, I'm going to copy paste this into the chat. If we look at the language here. So it seems like even if it doesn't lead you to that, that feeling naturally includes the other processes, even if you don't do them externally. Okay, Mahalakshmi says maybe your circumstances prevent you. Stuti Priya.
Hare Krishna, Mataji, like I was thinking that all these processes actually leads us to the fact and to the understanding that we are the servants of Krishna. And if we have that, then, these processes are already fructified.
What you're saying reminds me of when Srila Rupa Goswami is talking about always thinking of Krishna, which is, of course, a little different. And he's saying that if you're always thinking of Krishna, everything else is included in that. Then you're naturally performing all the other rules.
Yes.
So it sounds like that. Is that kind of what you're saying? That when you think when you're feeling I'm a servant, that naturally everything else is included.
Yes. The processes, all these 9 processes we are doing to achieve this. And this is, if it is already there, so that means, we have already gone through all that.
All right. Thank you. I like that analysis. Asi Prabhu, you have some further thoughts?
Yeah, Mataji, this material world, I think, is designed in such a way that you are meant to think in terms of lording it over the material nature. So this is the main design, this is the principal design of the material nature. Now, if you are thinking otherwise all the time, it means that if these thoughts are not disturbing you, the thoughts of lording it over the material nature, like Mataji has just said, I am just refining it in terms of what Prabhupada has written several places. So it means that you cross over that stage.
Wow. I really like this, that you've shifted the route. You've just shifted the whole route, which accomplishes everything. Pulastamuni Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Maybe it's how I'm interpreting it. It might be wrong, but based on the last statement, it seems like that unless you have this feeling, you're not performing these 9 items of bhakti. But at least you're not performing them as they should be performed.
Okay.
So the feelings must be the key to perform these items successfully.
Wow. That's also, that's like another take on this, which I really like. Advaita Krishna, and then we will end.
2 things, Mataji. First thing is, there's a progressive sort of, hierarchy in the listing. And it's higher. It's actually talking about a little bit of bhava there, because that feeling is bhava. So one may perform all the other previous listed without feelings. So unless you're practicing with feelings, so I think I kind of back Ashita Prabhu's angle that when you have that feeling, that means that you're actually experiencing a higher sort of level of Krishna consciousness, because you could be practicing the other 7, 6 previous ones without any feelings. And then when you actually get the feelings, then you start to think, because the processes are there, and they can be practiced in any religious principles without feelings either, as well.
Wow.
So first is the listing, and the second thing is it could be done mechanically.
Yes. All right. So all of us, including me, I'm giving you 2 home fun assignments. The one was brought up to think about Guru and Krishna Seva, not Guru Bhogi, to make sure that we're not guilty of using religion for materialistic purposes. And related to that, let's see how often and how deeply we can have this feeling of being a servant. So between now and our class at the same time tomorrow, to just kind of be checking in periodically during the day. It doesn't have to be at every moment, but periodically during the day, or, between the next 24 hours. How often and how deeply do I have this feeling that I am Krishna's servant? Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Any mistakes that I have here, I thank you for correcting me, and please ignore them. Anything good here is coming from Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas, and certainly not from me. Hare Krishna.